Skewing an object helps give it a sense of perspective or dimensionality, or it can draw attention to an object by making it look odd. There are several ways to skew objects in InDesign. I'm going to skew this text by selecting it with the selection tool, and I'm going to go get the shear tool. It's usually hiding underneath the scale tool. By the way, some people call it skewing, some people call it shearing. It's really the same thing. In this case, it's going to skew based on the center point because that's where the crosshairs are. I could change that either in the control panel, these reference points, or I can simply click someplace and that will move the crosshairs. Now, when I click and drag, it skews from that point. To be honest, it's very difficult to control the shearing and the skewing with the skew tool, so I rarely use this tool. Instead, I'll use the control panel for my skewing. I'll select another object, perhaps this image down here, and I can skew it by changing the value in the control panel. Again, this is going to skew from the center point because that's what's chosen in the reference point in the left side of the control panel. I'll choose -30, and you can see that it simply scaled -30% to the left. Here's a third way you can skew, with my favorite, the Free Transform tool. I'll hit E to get the Free Transform tool, and as I've said in earlier movies, the Free Transform tool is great because you can click in the middle to move, you can click on the corner or side handle to scale, but where's the skewing functionality? Where is it? Well, it's hidden. Here's a little trick. If you click on a side handle, click the mouse button down and hold it down, and then hold down the Command key or the Control key on Windows, now it lets you skew. Isn't that interesting? There's the skewing functionality with the Free Transform tool. As I said, skewing an object gives it sort of a false sense of perspective. Unfortunately, there's no way to do true perspective in InDesign. If you need that, you'll have to go use Illustrator instead. While flip-flopping might not be such a good thing in politics, it can be a great thing in page, especially when pictures are facing the wrong direction. For example, let's say I want to turn this teapot around so it faces the other way. How would I do it? I click on the picture, I come up to the control panel, and I simply click on the Flip Horizontal button. That's a new feature in CS3. Also a new feature is this little proxy icon, which indicates that something has changed about this image. There are a number of ways to flip as well. For example, I could scale it negatively. For example, I'll hold down the Command key while I drag straight across, and that scales it so that it turns around. I'll do it vertically here as well. Click with the Command key or Control key on Windows and scale it negatively, and it flips it over. If I decide that I don't like that effect anymore, I can come up to this little proxy and right-click on it, or Control-click on a Mac with a one-button mouse, and click Clear Transformations. It goes right back to where it was originally. Let me show you an example of how you might use this mirroring effect. I'm going to Shift Page down to go to page 2, and I'll zoom in here on this image. I'm going to flip this image, but I want to make a duplicate of it at the same time, so I'm going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows when I click on this button. And in this case, it will make a duplicate. Remember, the Option key or Alt on Windows always makes a duplicate, no matter what you're doing here in the control panel. Now I've got a duplicate of that, sort of like a reflection, right? So I'll hit the E key to go to the Free Transform tool, and then I'm going to click on this side handle and then hold on the Command key or Control key on Windows, and this lets me skew and scale at the same time, which is kind of cool, and let go. We saw it in the last movie. Now I've got something that's really starting to look like a reflection. But you know, a reflection should kind of fade out a little bit. Well, we can do that. I'll go to the effects and I'll add a directional feather. Let's move this up to the top of the screen so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to directional feather just on the top. The top, of course, is the bottom here because this image has been flipped over. That's looking a little bit better, maybe just a little bit more. And then I'm going to go to the transparency panel and change the blending mode to multiply. That kind of blends it into the background. And I might as well change the opacity to something like 60%. Click OK, and now I've got something that really looks sort of like a reflecting pool. I love that I can do these kinds of creative effects right on my InDesign page instead of relying on other programs. It's amazing. I have two little boys who, when they really like something, they say, "Do it again! Do it again!" That's how I feel in InDesign sometimes. I just want to do it again. But how can you do it again in InDesign? Well, that's where the Transform Again features come in handy. Let's say I select this object, and I'm I'm going to rotate it something like 17 degrees. Now I want to apply that same rotation to other objects on my page. How do I do it again? Well, I could select each one of them individually and change it, or I could select all of them and go to the Object menu and say Transform Again. There we go. There's 4 different options here. What do they mean? Well, Transform Again means apply the same transformation, in this case a rotation, to all of the selected objects as though they were a group. Okay? In this case, that's not very helpful, so let me undo that. Instead, I'm going to say Transform Again individually. Transform Again individually means transform each object as though I selected it and made the transformation, and then selected the next object and made the transformation, and so on. That's pretty cool. But what if I did more than just rotate? What if I perhaps moved, and I'll use the free transform tool to move and rotate and skew and do all kinds of stuff to one of these. Now what if I want to do all of those to these other objects? I'll select them all. Maybe I'll select the text frame as well. I'll go to Object, Transform Again, and in this case I'm going to use Transform Sequence Again. Again, if I just say again, it's going to transform all of them as though they were a group. Let me undo that, and instead I'm going to say Transform Sequence Again individually, which changes each of them as though it were a separate object. It skewed them, it moved them, it rotated them, and it gives me the effect that I was looking for. Here's another way that you might want to use Transform Sequence Again individually. Let's say you have a bunch of different frames. I'm going to hit W to move out of preview mode, and I'm just going to drag out a bunch of rectangle frames. Say this, and smaller, and bigger, and so on. Let's say I want all of these to be the same size. Maybe 6 picas by 6 picas, an inch by an inch. How would I do that? Well, I can apply it to one of these, say 6 picas by 6 picas. There's my 1 inch by 1 inch square, and now I can select all of these and say Object, Transform Again, Object, Transform Again, Transform Sequence Again individually. Boom, they're all 6 by 6. Note that these Do It Again features only work for transformations, like scaling, moving, rotating, skewing. I'm hoping that in a future version of InDesign we'll get a feature that will repeat anything I do. But in the meantime, Transform Again works on transformations, and it's pretty darn cool.